Well, first off, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out.
Gotta wait for Natalia to get things
Natalia.
started. Yeah.
What's up? What's up? What's up? All right. Looks like we are live on Facebook. That's good to hear. Welcome again to everyone who's joining us tonight from many different parts of the country and the world. This is the Labor and Climate Crisis panel led by the Tempest Collective. My name is Peter Ikeler. I'm a member of the Tempest Collective, live in Brooklyn, union member. And we have a very exciting group of speakers tonight and a huge opportunity for discussion and co-strategizing. So sort of by way of background and introduction, I wanted to sort of kick things off with an overview of what the situation is and sort of what this panel and the panelists are going to address and cover in their various presentations. Among the social crises that we face are escalating environmental disasters related to the intensification of global warming. This is generated by the powerful forces of fossil fuel capitalism that are overwhelming government efforts to reduce carbon emissions. The resulting climate emergency poses strategic challenges for socialists who understand that only the working class majority has the potential to tip the balance towards survival. Conceptions of working class power through strikes, through mass struggle, through disruption suggest themselves, but this is not yet the reality that exists before us in the US or globally. And internationally, we're in a period of intensified mass protests and working class militancy. Here in the US, there are signs of heightened class consciousness and militancy, and we're seeing expressions of it at Amazon, at Starbucks, and in many smaller struggles around the country. And while it's still in its early stages, one of our tasks as socialists is to both encourage this development and to close gaps between workers' struggles and the urgent need for radical climate action, centered not on elections, but on struggle. Any hope for the future involves a convergence of labor and climate politics, connecting the fight to reduce emissions with the struggle for an economic transition that provides decent jobs, good living standards, and quality of life for all. This convergence must become central to the working class consciousness and struggle of our time. So how can we extend the climate fight inside our unions and workplaces? That's one question that we're going to try and address tonight. And how can we build an effective coalition of labor, community, and environmental forces that are capable of tipping the balance towards survival? Is another question that the panelists and hopefully the discussion will address tonight. Before I introduce the four panelists themselves, let me just first give a background on Tempest. Tempest is a growing, we're a magazine and a website, but we're also a group you can join. We're the Tempest Collective. And we have many different areas of activity, but one of them is the Eco-Socialist Working Group, as well as a labor working group or labor committee that is teamed up to build tonight's presentation. The Eco-Socialist Working Group is based on the contention that the politics of socialism from below are pivotal and that challenging fossil fuel capitalism and the reining in of global heating will require mass multiracial class action in the form of strikes, protests, and disruption. And ultimately that a revolution will be necessary to overthrow capitalism for this to succeed and be maintained. Tempest as an organization, as a group, as a collective, aims to create a space from the left where we can come together to discuss and debate our goals and put forward a revolutionary vision that is both clear and understandable, and that also weighs in on our strategic and tactical questions and offers concrete guidance as well as theory for working class politics. So you can learn more about us if you're just new to what Tempest is, tempestmag.org, pretty easy to find, or you can just Google us. And there's many articles on the environmental crisis, on labor, and also how to join and get active and learn more. So let's now just briefly give an overview, or I'll give an overview of our four speakers tonight. We're lucky to have folks from many different areas of activity, activism, and with different theoretical perspectives joining us tonight. We have Jeremy Brecher, who is a senior strategic advisor for the Labor Network for Sustainability. He's also the author of a labor history classic called Strike, ! And also of The New Green Deal from Below. We have also Lauren Bianchi, who is a member of the Chicago Teachers Union, CTU. She teaches in Southeast Chicago, is active in the CTU Climate Justice Committee, and was part of the fight in Southeast Chicago to deny General Iron a permit to place a metal shredder in that neighborhood. Also, we have Marcelina Pedraza, who is an environmental justice activist, is an electrician at the Ford Assembly Plant in Southeast Chicago, is a member of the United Auto Workers Local 551. And she's also part of Unite All Workers for Democracy, which is a caucus in the UAW pushing for democracy, and is active in the Chicago General Iron struggle as well. So both Marcelina and Lauren will fill us in on that important fight that was challenging environmental racism in a particular area of South Chicago. Last but not least, we have Sean Petty, who is a registered nurse in New York City, a member of the New York State Nurses Association, and a very long time socialist and union climate activist. The structure for tonight is pretty simple. Each speaker is going to have around 8 to 10 minutes to address some of these questions and maybe pose some new ones that we haven't thought of yet. And then we'll open it up. We'll have a sort of structured discussion where folks will have a chance to put themselves on stack and ask questions or raise comments or propose ideas, and we'll go from there. So without further ado, let's first open it up to Jeremy.
First, as usual, is to unmute and to say that it's great to be with you all. It's very great to be with labor activists who are concerned about climate and want to and are participating in the struggle to prevent global destruction through climate change. I feel very comfortable being here with you all. It's who I belong with. I work for an organization called the Labor Network for Sustainability, whose purposes are very much in line with what's been laid out for the goal of our discussion tonight, and to try to build cooperation between labor and climate movements, and to help the labor movement develop an effective and appropriate way of engaging with climate issues. And I should also say I've written about the Chicago Teachers Union quite a bit, especially in the new edition of my book, Strike, the 50th anniversary edition that came out last year. I covered quite a bit of the action by the Chicago's Teachers Union, and quite a lot of my understanding of where organized labor needs to go has come from their action. So that's something I hope we'll hear more about, as well as the other UAW and healthcare activists and actions, which I hope we'll also hear about as we go along. I think I was asked to start by talking about something I've been writing about lately, which is the great Green New Deal from below. I've been doing a series of commentaries on the LNS website, and actually I'm just in the process of writing a book proposal to turn them into a book on the Green New Deal from below. And I guess the first question I was asked to address is, what the heck is the Green New Deal from below? So we all know about the Green New Deal and the origin story with Sunrise and AOL. And from that point on, most discussion about the Green New Deal has been about it as a national program, most often as a national legislative program, something that we would work to get through Congress, also as something that with a somewhat sympathetic administration, we might try to get implemented through executive action. And as we've come up against the barriers of a Congress which is not prepared to pass even the much milder Build Back Better climate and jobs program, and an administration which has changed from at least talking the climate talk to massively laying the basis for climate destruction through its leases of federal lands for fossil fuel extraction and other measures that we could talk about if we had more time. We're up against a sort of stalemate at the national political level on the Green New Deal. But what I discovered as I started looking at it was that there is what I first thought was a trickle, but turns out to be more of a flood of activities at a local and state level that are embodying the principles of the Green New Deal. Some of them call themselves the Green New Deal. Some of them don't use the term, but have the basic concept of addressing the climate crisis and using that as a vehicle for addressing our great crisis of injustice and our other crisis of inadequate good jobs, which is being concealed at the moment by our low unemployment rate, but that is actually, if you talk to people and if you look at what is actually happening in people's lives, it remains a major crisis that is unaffected by the fact that there are ostensibly jobs going begging. I'm reminded of the worker who said, yes, there are lots of jobs. In fact, I have 3 of them. And the fact that people have to have 2 and 3 jobs just in order to get by is illustrative of what the job piece of this crisis is. So what the Green New Deal, as I say, I probably have written up 30 or 40 or 50 examples of what I'm talking about in the last few months. And if you want to know more, you can look at the website of Labor Network for Sustainability, and you'll see a lot of those examples in my commentaries. But just to give a couple examples offhand, let me start with especially since we have an electrical worker on the program tonight. So an example from the IBEW in California of a local that actually has a climate organizer, first one that I know about anywhere in the country, and has been strongly involved in supporting the moves toward zero fossil fuel burning in the San Diego area, which is where San Diego and Imperial County is where this local is located. They've been deeply involved in trying to shape a mineral extraction, lithium extraction plan that is developing for that area in order to make it both environmentally sound and to have it be something that's done with union jobs and union conditions. I could go on and on with the things that they're doing, and just give one more example because it's also a labor example and such a surprise, which is that the United Mine Workers has been backing the creation of a green economic, fossil-free energy development manufacturing project in West Virginia. And let me try to quickly wrap up now with the other piece of what's needed in order to have the kinds of coalition that we need and the ability to reach into unions that have so far not been supportive of climate protection. And that's the idea of the just transition. This is also something that's happening on a much smaller scale. But for example, there is a law that was passed and an agency that was created in Colorado This a just transition agency specifically oriented towards creating job opportunities, and in the meantime, economic supports for workers in the coal industry and for the communities that are affected by the closing of coal-fired power plants. So let me stop right there because I'm eager to hear the discussion, and I'll be glad to come back and address any questions or things that people want to discuss.
That's great. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you very much. So let's move on now to our next panelist, Lauren Bianchi, teacher and CTU activist in Chicago.
All right, hi everybody. So my name is Lauren Bianchi. I'm a social studies teacher and a member of the Chicago Teachers Union. So I work at George Washington High School, which is a CPS high school located in the Southeast Side neighborhood. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience as part of the Victorious campaign to stop General Iron. And then I'll say a little bit more about, why it was important that teachers and CTU members were a part of that fight, and maybe what we can be working on in the future to kind of build on that victory. So I first got involved with this campaign back in 2019. So really during the school year after we went on strike in 2019, between the strike and then when the schools got shut down and we shifted to remote learning, I had heard of some science teachers in my building kind of starting to bring the issue of a proposed move of an industrial metal shredder from wealthy and majority white Lincoln Park to down the street from our school building. So some teachers were trying to basically bring that into the classroom, ask students what they think about this. And, when I first heard about it, people were, upset to learn that this was a possibility. Flash forward a few months later, we're kind of all stuck at home during the lockdown, trying to figure out how to do remote teaching for the first time. And myself and other teachers were reading about this issue of the proposed move, concerned about the negative health impacts that would be involved in continuing to operate a public school across the street from such a facility. And we decided, we need to reach out to neighborhood organizations, to environmental justice leaders in the community, and find out what we can do to mobilize as teachers, as people who work and live in the neighborhood, to stop this move from happening. Basically, we, myself and the others that were involved in this campaign, we built a multi-generational, multiracial coalition that was primarily led by women of color. And we were united around really the singular demand that Mayor Lori Lightfoot and the Chicago Department of Public Health must deny the final operating permit to General Iron. So to give a little background for folks that may be unfamiliar, basically the company in question here, General Iron, had operated a metal shredding facility for many decades on the north side. North side residents had complained for years about strange smells, noxious smells, debris and kind of auto fluff floating past the facility. People in Lincoln Park did not want this facility to exist in their neighborhood. And so when Rahm Emanuel, as he was preparing to leave office, as one of his final acts, kind of gave the green light on the Lincoln Yards deal, this very, very large development, it was kind of convenient to say, all right, well, we're going to move that to make way for Lincoln Yards. And where are we going to move it? Well, you know, they had to move it to one of the only other areas in the city that is zoned for the highest level of industry. And, you know, that for many years has been the Southeast side, where, you know, the steel mills historically operated. The steel that built downtown was manufactured in the Southeast side. And of course, so many of those jobs have gone away and just left residents that continue to live there with soil that contains lead and manganese, harmful heavy metals, some of the worst air quality throughout the city. And that's why this fight was so important, because, you know, there's a long history of resistance in the community. There were previous fights against petroleum coke piles and various other small victories. But in the context of a respiratory pandemic, this was just such a clear example of environmental racism, moving a serial polluter from a white wealthy neighborhood to a working class brown and Black neighborhood was just such an obvious example of environmental racism. It really rallied a lot of people to support the campaign. So it took over 2 years of really constant organizing. We had, you know, multiple meetings a week at the height of this campaign. We were mostly meeting virtually because, again, this is also at the height of COVID. We had multiple protests, almost constant press conferences with legal updates about the campaign. But it ultimately took a hunger strike that lasted 30 days to really force not only city officials, but it ultimately took Michael Regan, Biden's head of the EPA, to step in and actually force the mayor's hand and say, hey, you need to delay the permit process here. So the mayor actually never officially addressed residents that were on a hunger strike. We waited 30 days before people had to call it and, you know, end the hunger strike before somebody got seriously ill or, you know, potentially even lost their life. But the hunger strike did successfully raise the issue to the national level and force the federal government to step in and get involved. So, you know, this entire time we thought that we were going to lose. We did not know if we would successfully be able to get the permit denied. The facility was being built because the construction permits had already been approved. We were trying, you know, what we thought was a last ditch effort to prevent the operating permit for the facility. We did not, and people were telling us, you know, this is a done deal. Look, they've already built the thing. There's no way you can stop this. Like, yeah, we don't want it either, but, you know, we don't think there's anything you guys can do to stop it. But we brought enough different people in the community, enough. We spotlighted this as an issue. We highlighted the role of young people and students and how this would impact their education, having to attend school, trying to, you know, participate in sports and not being able to breathe when you're running, for example. Those are some of the ways that we were able to win. So I'll say a little bit about why I think it was important that teachers and union teachers were involved in this fight. So for me, as a relatively new teacher, when I first got involved in this campaign, this really made for myself and my coworkers to get involved in stopping General Iron and stopping a serial polluter from moving across the street from our school was very much an extension of what I think the Chicago Teachers Union has brought to the entire labor movement, which is making the connection between our working conditions as teachers and our students' learning conditions and the political issues that are most important in the school communities where we teach. So raising the issues of racism, segregation, lack of affordable housing. And so for me, this was just a natural extension of that. If for those of us who work in environmental justice communities, who teach in these school communities, environmental racism has to be brought into our workplace. It is a union issue. So yeah, I'll kind of wrap up just by saying that you know, my coworkers and my students and I are currently now, you know, after participating in this fight to deny the permit, are now advocating for a new school building, and we're raising the issue of lead and asbestos and an outdated, busted HVAC ventilation system in our building. So I'm curious to hear how we can kind of make those connections with the work that other people are doing. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to go to Marcelina Pedraza, or Marcy, who's also participated in the same struggle in Southeast Chicago. So go ahead, Marcy.
Hi, I'm sorry. Can you hear me? I was having some technical difficulties. As you said, my name is Marcy Pedraza. I've been a union electrician for 23 years. I started in the IBEW, but now I'm in maintenance. I work at Ford, UAW Local 551. I'm a long life resident of the Southeast Side. I come from a long line of union workers, steel workers, railroad workers. I'm involved in my daughter's school, which is right next to the school that Lauren teaches at. And, you know, like you said, we've been, I don't know what else, Lauren gave a really great kind of summary of what this campaign has accomplished in the past couple years, but it seems like, you know, we're always fighting this toxic legacy that we have, you know, being from here. Like I remember when I was, you know, younger, the smells of the steel mills when they were still operating, and just the, you know, dirt and soot had left behind, and just thinking that was normal. You know, this is how, you know, this is how it is, you know. But then I explored other parts of the city and the country later on in life and realized that that's not how it is everywhere. So, you know, those steel mills are long gone, but, you know, we're still getting dumped on, and you know, we're tired of it. We've constantly been fighting, as Lauren mentioned, you know, piles of pet coke. They tried to build a gasification plant here right at the site, a similar site to where General Iron is, or, you know, it's trying to be, you know, the Republic Steel site. And that, you know, was also promise of, oh, all these new jobs for the neighborhood, which was just a lie. It wasn't going to create all these jobs. Construction jobs in the beginning, sure, but not long-term jobs for the community. Then pet coke, and then piles of manganese just laying around and ending up, you know, in our soil, in our backyard, on our houses. And this is all right near, you know, people's homes, schools. I can see the, you know, this prospective place of RMG, General Iron, like from my house, you know. And they said, oh, it's far away from all these things, not like in Lincoln Park. But no, it's pretty much across the street from a high school, an elementary school, a park, playground, you know, people's homes. So, you know, all of our organizing with, like Lauren said, multi-generational. I mean, we had kids in high school, my own kid who's 11, you know, her friends, and all the way up to retirees, immigrants, you know, working parents, a lot of moms, you know, because we're moms, we care about our babies and their health. You know, we don't want them to grow up in a wasteland. You know, there's all kinds of Superfund sites around here that still haven't been cleaned up. And, you know, I think it's just important to emphasize that, you know, I'm not an urban planner. I'm not a politician. You know, we've learned a lot in these last few years, and all of my organizing learned a lot about environmental justice and just, you know, zoning. And, you know, I feel like sometimes I'm a chemist or a physicist, you know, and I don't have that formal training, but we as working people need to have a seat at the table when these policies are being made. And, like, you know, the city, you know, based on the urgency from Michael Regan, did this health impact assessment or cumulative impact assessment, and which took them months to do because they never had to do this before. And, you know, what they came up with was this like red, yellow, green, like chart that Like my kid could have come up with something better in shorter time. And, we thought, okay, well, based on their research, which wasn't a whole lot, they hired this company, paid them $1 million, I think, to test the soil without it being from a place that was operational. So it was just here's some dirt, we're going to test it, give us $1 million. Anyway, we thought, okay, well, I don't know if this is going to work, but we'll see what happens. But based on all of that, the city they changed its tune from saying, oh, this is going to be a state-of-the-art, safe and green facility, to this is a company that can't be trusted, basically. Based on their previous violations, they had an RTO explosion and just other fines, their slaps on the wrist. I think I got like $18,000 fine for this and that. And yeah, I guess they finally listened, which was kind of a shock to a lot of us, but I'm very, very glad that it happened. And we're still, we still have to, it seems like we still have to fight, because never know what's gonna happen next, or what's coming next. So I'll just also like to add, we deserve, we do need jobs. Like I'm always fighting this with my union siblings, like, well, don't we want jobs for the neighborhood? Of course we do, but not at the expense of our health or safety or the environment. Because if we don't have a safe place to work in or a healthy environment, there's going to be no job to go to. These steel mill companies, they didn't care about the people and the jobs when they packed up and left. When they realized, oh, we can make steel somewhere else for cheaper, they just left and left this community that I grew up in to, totally, like, it was a mass exodus. And our main strip, Commercial Avenue, used to have movie theaters and stores and everything. And the neighborhood just got dilapidated, and I moved around the country and the city, but I came back home because these are my roots and this is where my community is. And a lot of people like to say, well, why don't you just leave? Like some of my coworkers or other tradespeople that I worked with, they don't really care because they don't live here. And they say, why don't you just move? And they all live in Indiana or the suburbs, so it doesn't affect them. If they don't see these smokestacks and pollution on the way home, or when their neighborhood, then it doesn't really affect them, so they don't care. But I'll just end with that. And thank you for having me. This is a really important topic, and I'm always trying to get the blue-green alliance going. It's a never-ending battle.
That's great. Thank you so much, Marcy. Our last speaker for the formal panel tonight will be Sean Petty, a nurse and labor activist in New York.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, so I guess I've sort of been charged with tying a few of these different strands together. And so, yeah, I'm just gonna try to provide some context for these fights and these initiatives that have emerged. And, just the small task of tying together 15 years of history and, laying out some, specific ideas about how to take things forward. So, I think we're at a really interesting moment. There's an ongoing sea change in political consciousness around climate change that's developed over the last 15 years. We have massively expanded and generational development of an understanding that the very, existence of human beings on this planet is in jeopardy if we don't radically restructure key elements of our economy in a very short time period. And that is a very significant thing. But at the same time, the social movement that developed and created that consciousness, I would say, is in a lull right now, and is facing very stark, I think, strategic questions and directions that it could go in. So that movement started out, I sort of pegged the beginning of the movement to the emergence of the response to Hurricane Katrina and the devastation that was right. It was the first, I think, sort of moment that really provided the context that climate change is here. It's impacting things in the here and now, and the federal government's response or profound lack of response to that disaster and the race and class dynamics that were inherent in it were, I think, provided the context for the first understanding of some of the key issues, and then, what emerged in the wake of that was, I think, the development of organizations like 350.org and other groups that really built some successful movements around fossil fuel infrastructure, namely the Keystone XL pipeline, which was attempting to move one of the dirtiest forms of fossil fuel, tar sands, from Canada, move additional amounts of it, I should say, into the United States. Unions started to join that fight, namely transport unions and nurses unions, National Nurses United, TWU and ATU very much were involved in that fight, and really began to integrate union involvement in the climate change struggle. And then I think unions that have been historically working around some of these neighborhood fights and some of these environmental racism fights and environmental justice movements, you saw them begin to cross-pollinate and organize some of these fights in a more prolific way. And this ultimately culminated in the Mass People's Climate March in 2014. That saw, over 100,000 people, some say 500,000 people, some say 1 million, I think, people, depending on your estimates, marching in New York City. And that contained the largest mobilization of union members and unions that mobilized around climate change at the time. And this sort of dovetailed with what I think was, or this fed into what I think was the apex of this particular moment in 2016, when the struggle at Standing Rock emerged over indigenous self-determination, over their water rights and their ability not to have fracked water on their land. And that fight to stop the DAPL pipeline that was bringing in, that was developing fossil fuel infrastructure and threatening the water supply, that brought in a massively increased attention around the issue of fossil fuel infrastructure, indigenous rights, and brought to the forefront this question of what do you do, jobs versus our ability to live on this planet? Which direction are we going in? And unions had to pick a side, and many unions picked the right side and mobilized in solidarity with that fight. Since then, I think there's a number of political circumstances that have developed that have sent us into the current trajectory. I think the Bernie campaign of 2016, later on in that year, really sort of cohered this growing radicalization and in a lot of ways increased its degree of political consciousness and organizational power. But at the same time, it also, and sort of contradictory and simultaneously, solidified its political horizons that at this point in time we have yet to transcend. So Trump's victory in 2016 really initially helped continue the radicalization as people moved from the Bernie campaign into resisting Trump's proto-fascist agenda, and resulted in a number of mass protests and movements. But I think quickly, unfortunately, as Trump consolidated his power, and as he became more comfortable within the main ruling circles of this country, that it really dealt a blow towards many left movements, and the movement against climate change was very much one of them. I think AOC's victory in 2018 provided an additional boost of excitement and momentum, and generated the widespread awareness of the idea of a Green New Deal, and of the idea that we can potentially fundamentally restructure our economy to stop climate change and to prioritize jobs and workers and oppressed people over the idea of fossil fuel profits. But since then, I think the movement has faced a good amount of confusion as to how that idea is it can be manifested. And I think there's been a lot of tactical splintering around how much we should focus on direct action, how much we should focus on building protests versus how we should approach dealing with legislation and lobbying and working with politicians inside of the Democratic Party. So that really that creates the context for the moment that we're in. And of course, COVID, brought a lot of contradictory circumstances to the movement for climate change, both in terms of the lockdowns, but also obviously that being needing to be the primary thing that people were aware of and were organizing around. So, I think we need the long story short is we need a return. I think we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think that the strategic imperative right now is we need a return to the disruptive direct action of the Standing Rock and Keystone XL era of this movement. And we need a continuation of a focus on the infrastructure fights that the previous panelists spoke about, the stopping of polluting infrastructure, the stopping of fossil fuel infrastructure, and obviously working with groups of residents, groups of workers, and community organizations to mobilize to physically stop these efforts from continuing to happen. And likewise, we need that's a defensive fight. That's something to stop the bad stuff. We need alongside that, we need movements to fight for the good stuff. We need a movement to fight not just for broad scope ideas like the Green New Deal. We need to keep those things on our horizon, but we need to also keep an eye towards fighting for more specific things like the municipalization of energy. We need to fight for cities and states to control energy production and to make that energy production democratically accountable and make that energy renewable, and to eradicate fossil fuels through fighting for that to happen. So those are just some of the few things that I think provide some of the context. I think going into the there's a couple of opportunities, a couple of key fault lines of debate that I think is worth going into, that we can go into the discussion around. But I'll just put in a plug. Many of those debates hopefully will be happening in a couple of weeks at the Labor Notes Conference, where there's actually a pretty impressive number of climate change focused workshops that are going to be offered. And I think we'll speak to some of the different directions that the movement can go in, and that union and workplace activists who are focused around climate change can begin to develop a more clear strategy. So I'll save the rest of what I wanted to say for the discussion. But I think there's a number of different fault lines that have emerged and trends that have emerged that we could continue to unpack.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. And thank you to all of the four panelists who were able to present and kick off our discussion tonight. So at this point, we're going to open up the to everybody who's present to indicate and either ask a question, make a comment.